Let's turn today to Matthew's Gospel, chapter 11. And it came about that when Jesus had finished giving instructions to his 12 disciples, he departed from there to teach and preach in their cities. We were considering last week how Jesus, having taught his disciples the principles of the kingdom in Matthew 5, 6, and 7, and having given them a practical demonstration of the power available in the kingdom of God in Matthew chapters 8 and 9, then selected 12 to be his apostles and gave them personal instructions concerning how they were to conduct themselves, what their attitude was to be when they went out to represent him in Israel. And he sent them out, having given them instructions and the demonstration of the power of the kingdom, and then he himself departed to teach and preach in their cities. We read in verse 2, when John in prison heard of the works of Christ, he sent word by his disciples and said to him, "Are you the coming one, or shall we look for someone else?" It's quite amazing that John the Baptist, who actually saw the Spirit like a dove descending upon Jesus when he baptized him in the river Jordan, and who heard the voice from heaven say, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased," that he, John the Baptist, of all people, should have any doubt concerning whether Jesus was the Christ, the Anointed One. But there is a lesson there for us to learn. We can ask ourselves, why did John have a doubt, even though he had such a visible and audible manifestation of the power of God and a proof from heaven itself that Jesus was the Son of God? The doubt came because John did not receive what he expected to receive, and that was deliverance from prison. We must remember that John was under the Old Covenant. He was a part of Israel. And the promises given to Israel under the Old Covenant were that if they honored God and obeyed him, God would deliver them from their enemies, and they would be the head and not the tail. They would always be on top and never underneath. And John was familiar with these promises in the Old Covenant. And here he found himself, though he had been faithful right until the very end, locked up in prison. And the one whom he had pointed out to as the Son of God didn't seem to be delivering him from prison. He didn't seem to be answering his prayer in the way he expected. And that's why the doubt came. And the lesson we can learn from that is that we too can come into doubt if we find that our prayers are not answered in the way we expect God to answer them. It may be some prison that you're in. It may not be a physical prison. It may be some other type of prison, an invisible one. And maybe God hasn't answered your prayer to deliver you from those tight circumstances which constitute your prison. And then you begin to wonder, and unbelief comes in. And it is in this context that Jesus said in verse 6, "Blessed is he who keeps from stumbling over me, who keeps from taking offense at me, who doesn't get offended because I don't answer his prayer in the way he expects me to. Blessed is the man who can have faith even when his circumstances are tight and pressing, and he prays and does not get the answer that he anticipates and expects." Jesus answered and said to these disciples of John who came with this question in verse 4, "Go and report to John the things which you hear and see." Jesus gave them examples, a visible example for John to be encouraged by, to answer his question whether Jesus was indeed the coming one. "The blind receive sight," he said in verse 5, "and the lame walk. The lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear, and the dead are raised up, and the poor have the gospel preached to them." This is the culmination of all these things. This is the greatest of all, greater than the blind receiving sight and the lame walking, greater than the dead being raised up. Jesus concludes with this, which is the greatest of all. The poor have the good news preached to them, and blessed is he who doesn't get offended over me. Jesus didn't reply directly to that question which John asked, are you the coming one? He didn't say yes or no. He gave that which would confirm to John that he was the coming one. He said, here is the proof. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised up, and the poor have the gospel preached to them. And a personal message for John, blessed is the one who doesn't get offended over me, doesn't get offended when I don't answer his prayers the way he expects me to. And then after they went away, Jesus began to say to the multitudes concerning John. And he said some remarkable words concerning John, but he didn't say it when the disciples of John were present. He said it after they had gone. He didn't want to say those good words to unnecessarily tempt John to spiritual pride. He said to the multitudes, what did you go out into the wilderness to look at? A reed shaken by the wind? What did you go out to see? Verse 8, a man dressed in soft clothing. He said, those who wear soft clothing are in king's palaces. But why did you go out? To see a prophet? And I tell you, the one who is more than a prophet. This is the one about whom it is written. And he quotes from the book of Malachi, behold, I send my messenger before your face. This is a quotation from Malachi chapter 3, verse 1. Who will prepare your way before you. Truly I say to you, verse 11, among those born of women there has not arisen anyone greater than John the Baptist. John the Baptist was the greatest person born from Adam up to Christ. He was the greatest under the Old Covenant, greater than even Mary, the mother of Jesus. Jesus himself said that among all those born of women, up to that point, there was no one greater than John the Baptist. Of course, Jesus himself was excluded. His birth was miraculous. But Jesus said, he who is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. Jesus had come to establish the kingdom of heaven, or the kingdom of God, or the new covenant, as opposed to the old covenant, which was an earthly kingdom. This was a heavenly kingdom in the new covenant. Those who belong to the old covenant, their mind is set on the things of earth. Their blessings are earthly, physical healing, material prosperity, and many other physical blessings were the blessings promised under the old covenant. But in the kingdom of heaven, which is the new covenant, the blessings promised are spiritual healing and spiritual prosperity. And correspondingly, our mind, if we are under the new covenant and a part of the kingdom of heaven, should have our mind set on the things which are in heaven and not on earth. This is one mark of those who are living according to the principles of the kingdom of heaven. And the one who is least in the kingdom of heaven, in other words, the one who is the very least person who has entered into the new covenant, comes to a higher level than John the Baptist, the greatest under the old covenant. This is not automatic. It doesn't mean just because we are living in the new covenant age that we have new covenant experience in our lives. No, far from it. In fact, most people who live nowadays do not enter into the new covenant because they haven't understood the new covenant properly. It's not just forgiveness of sins. Under the new covenant, God promises to write his laws within our hearts and minds and lead us to partake of his nature, to overcome sin, and to be pure. And when we have come to this level of partaking of God's own nature, that is a far higher privilege than the greatest person who lived under the old covenant could ever attain to. This was the meaning of the most holy place in the temple or the tabernacle being blocked out to people under the old covenant. But that was opened up when Jesus died on the cross and the veil was rent, teaching us that we had now the privilege of entering in to a fellowship with the Father who lived beyond the veil in the most holy place that the greatest people under the old covenant could not have. And then Jesus went on to say, if you care to accept it, John himself is Elijah who was to come. This also was a prophecy in Malachi chapter 4. It's not that Elijah would come himself, but Malachi 4:5 says that before the great and dreadful day of the Lord said, Malachi 4:5, I'm going to send you Elijah the prophet. And Jesus puts these two prophecies in Malachi, the one in chapter 3 verse 1, quoted in Matthew 11:10, along with the prophecy in Malachi 4:5, and says, this messenger who came before Jesus to prepare the way for him, and who came in the spirit of Elijah, was John the Baptist himself, who prepared the way as a forerunner for Jesus, who inaugurated the new covenant into which all of us can enter if we have faith.